Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. How's everyone's day going? Where are you joining from? Hi, Sunny. Today we're going to be doing, I'm still kind of stuck on flowers, but I want to take a slightly different direction with it, and we're going to be painting two different things today. Hello, hello. Thanks for joining on your vacation. I hope this is an extra nice, relaxing part of it. I made myself a really good smoothie this morning, but I didn't blend it enough, and so it's still got too big of ice chunks in it. Yeah, I'm glad you're back, Sunny. You like the teal? Yeah. This one was so simple to do. This is one of those ones where if you overthink it, the worse it gets. All right, it is 11, so let's actually get started. For those of you who don't know, hi, my name is Lacey. I am the artist behind Rebel Unicorn Crafts, and every other week, which is the new schedule, we do a live watercolor class. And today, when you're joining in, we're going to be painting these two kind of wildflower type or flowery kind of inspired things. One, we're going to incorporate it into a landscape, and the other one we're going to do a little more free form, and we're just going to paint it right kind of on the paper, and it's going to either look nice like this or great outlined. Oh my goodness, you were in the hospital for 54 days? I'm glad you found watercolor. Yeah, and today I am going to be painting with my palette, so this will be a good demo for it. These were both painted with my palette, and I did use a little bit of my Neon Flamingo one. This one's a handmade one in the sunset of this, so I might show that too. Hello, hello. Also, by the way, for the person who was in the hospital, I hope you are feeling better. Okay, so let's actually get started. If you are brand new to watercolor, what we're going to be using today is we'll need 2 pieces of paper. I'm going to be painting just in this sketchbook, or I think on the other page here. This is Canson XL watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, and this is a cellulose-based one. But on the other one, I am going to be using this watercolor. It's a block, and this one is 100% cotton. And I'm going to be painting on that for the other one so you can kind of see some of the other effects. So the blueberry muffin, I am working on ordering more of it. It's supposed to be on its way. I don't know. The whole ordering thing is very difficult to get the same things again. So anyways, if you are brand new here, you're going to need some watercolors. You're going to need a paintbrush. This is a size 12 round brush. And then you're going to need something to wipe off your paper too. Also, if you don't have watercolor, that's totally fine. You can go ahead and do it with whatever supplies you do have. We're going to start with laying in the background of this one. If you're brand new to my classes, we usually work on a couple things so that we can let some things dry kind of naturally, and then we can work on others in the meantime. So we're going to be starting with this one because we want to lay in Hi, Nora and Evan. Yeah, I'm moving to a schedule of every other week for my classes. So I'm actually going to start by kind of sketching out. I don't usually in my landscapes, but just so that you guys can kind of see the general form where we're going to be working on a couple things. I've got a little dog hair there. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of generally sketch in where I want these little mountains to be. And I'm going to have to draw a little bit darker for you guys. This is usually how light I would draw, but I don't think you guys can actually see that. So let's go a little darker. You guys should draw really lightly where only you can actually see, but I'm going to draw a little darker for your benefit. There, I think you can see that now. I'm going to put another little mountain range here, kind of overlapping. And then one thing I want to show, I did see that, at least I know one person was asking about a kneaded eraser and why you would use something like this over a different one. And it is really just how much damage this does to the paper. I can actually just kind of tap and pick up a lot of that without having to scrub and kind of affect the texture of the paper. So that's one of the reasons why you would use this. You can also, after you do a sketch, you could come back in and pick up a lot of the graphite so that it would reduce the amount you're going to see. Hello to Sharon. I'm using 2 watercolor papers. The first one is, I bought a whole bunch of different 100% cotton pads, so I'm kind of experimenting with them to see which one I think is the best. And I personally prefer watercolor blocks if I am going to get a pad of paper, just because it keeps it all taped down. We don't have to do anything. It is all glued on the sides, so it's really easy to paint on. So this is this one. And then on the other one, I'm going to be painting on Canson XL 140 pound watercolor paper. All right, then our last little layer is just going to be this meadow. And so this is really the basis of our sketch. We're just going to have a couple layers here. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of work pseudo wet on wet, wet on dry. We just want a nice blending sunset here. So this one you can kind of take some liberties with. If you prefer to have a more sunny day, you could go ahead and do that. If you want a sunset like me, you can follow along. I'm going to go ahead and clean out one of the parts in my palette. And I should have actually grabbed a different set that had all of them, but I just packed them up for a couple things. This one, I actually removed one side of it, so it actually does have another mixing well on my palette, but I removed it just for having more room, especially when I'm showing you on live, so I don't have as much to kind of manage. And hopefully, yes, this will be saved to YouTube. I do owe you guys, I forgot to upload the last one. I haven't checked to see if it did upload. I've had a lot going on. So I'm going to go ahead and spray my paints. If you are brand new to watercolor, we actually pre-wet all of the colors first. You can either get a pipette and drop in water to each one of them, or you could drop in some water like this. But we want to actually pre-wet them to let them activate for a minute or two before we actually start to try to paint with them, because we'll be able to get more color. Then I'm going to put a little bit of water in here, and I am going to mix up a bit of a blue, darker blue color to put at the very, very top of this. And the way I want to mix up my darker color is first I'm going to grab a little tester strip here. So this is just a scrap piece of paper so that I can double check what color it is. And I'm going to initially dip into this blue raspberry, which is kind of like a, you can see this one's my favorite one. I've used almost all of it. It's kind of like a phthalo blue. So if you don't have this set specifically, pick something like that. Then I'm going to go into that blueberry muffin, which is a darker, more kind of navy, almost an ultramarine color. I'm going to mix those two together, and I'm just going to double check to see what that color looks like. I like that color. And I'm also going to prep, because I do want to put a little of this in. This is my neon flamingo. This one is a handmade one. You could also use this bright pink one, but I just love this one. It has some really interesting granulating effects that I think look really cool on this textured paper for the sunset. All right, so let me see if I can put that down here, and I'm going to fold this over, and I'm going to be holding mine just so that we can kind of work together, and I can hold it at a bit of an angle. I mentioned before that we're going to be kind of working wet on wet, wet on dry. We're going to do both at the same time. Because I'm working on a cotton paper, I've got a little more leeway and a little more time to work because it's a little more forgiving. If you're working on a non-cotton paper, you might want to do completely wet on wet so that you've got some additional time. But what I'm going to do is start by putting this darker blue, just a strip at the top, and then I'm going to be dipping into water and bringing that down so I get a nice kind of gradient transition. And depending on how that goes, then I can make some decisions on the other colors I'm going to place in there. For example, on this one, I was able to get a little bit of some sun peeking out because I didn't get the blue down too far. But if I got the blue down too far, that would be kind of dangerous to add that in. I'm just going to start by just loosely placing that darker color right at the top here. And then I'm going to just pick up some water in my brush. And I'm just going to start to kind of soften the bottom of this so that I get a little bit of a gradient. Because I'm doing a sunset, nothing needs to be perfect. And I'm actually going to bring that gradient down even beyond, I'm not going to bring it all the way down to the page, but beyond where the mountains are, just so that it kind of softens behind them. And if we get some of those nice pinks and things in there, it will kind of provide a glow onto the mountain. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of this neon flamingo, just a little bit. And I'm just going to touch this in here. In just a couple spots. Maybe I'll grab some of the watermelon sugar too. It's a similar color. It's a little bit more purpley than the neon flamingo. And I'm just going to place this a couple spots where I just feel like it will look nice. I can also come in with some water and kind of drop that in. And I did preserve enough of this here where I feel fairly confident that if I add some yellow here, it's not going to completely kind of bleed into the blue and get green. So I'm going to grab some of this one. And I'm just going to place a little bit there, wash my brush. And I'm just going to kind of soften. And then in order to make sure it does not bleed into that blue, I'm actually going to put a little bit of that pink right above it. Because I would rather, if it's going to bleed into one, I want it to bleed into that pink color so that it makes an orange instead of some sort of weird green color in my sky. All right, let me just make sure here in the comments. So it was originally dry. It's pretty much wet now. I'm going to keep adding in a little bit more of this pink, just kind of as I see fit. And this is where you can kind of change and decide the direction of some of your clouds. I'm even going to come in with a little bit extra. Everything is nice and wet now on the top part. I'm going to go in with a little extra of this blue because I want to darken certain areas. And then just soften it down. And I want to make sure that it comes a little bit onto the mountains too, because that will kind of create an interesting layer of glow. So I'm just going to place a little bit there. Okay. So this is the original, and this is where my first layer is going to be. And if you're brand new here, yes, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to set this one to the side to kind of let this sink in a little bit. I might need to use a hairdryer in a little bit, but we have a second painting we're going to do, and this one's a little bit easier. And also, if you don't like landscapes, then it'll be a little more accessible because you might just want to paint the flowers. So I'm going to set this to the side right now, and I'm going to switch over to this other one. Hello, hello. You got Loveland? Oh, hi. Yeah, I live close to there. I used to actually have some of my art in the Independence Gallery in Loveland. Virginia, Texas, Atlanta, Vienna, Kentucky, New Mexico. You guys are everywhere here. Egypt. Did I already say that? Los Angeles, Iowa. I love that you added the corn. I actually grew up on a corn farm. My dad grew corn, pinto beans, and alfalfa. One of my very obscure life talents is being excellent at setting irrigation tubes. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is something kind of inspired by this, and we will have to kind of flip this so you'll see it upside down, but we're just gonna talk about doing some kind of loose flowers, and I think this would be super cute in a frame, like a white frame, where this just kind of sits at the bottom, and then you just have these nice little flowers. Somebody asked me what my zodiac sign was, and I initially thought of that TikTok song because I'm a Cancer. What's your sign? All right, so let's kind of do this lavender inspired one first. So I'm actually going to, since I'm not going to need this blue anymore, I'm going to kind of change this blue into the lavender color that I want to use for my lavender sprigs. This is my new sketchbook, yes. Okay, who has the username Floofy Boople Snoot? That's so amazing. Love that, love that. Yeah, this would be a really good Mother's Day card or just like a happy spring type thing. I am working on a couple more tutorials for Easter and spring cards that will be coming out soon. All right, let's start with the lavender. So I'm taking this blue base. You could actually just dip straight into this one, but I actually like to make my own purples. If I ever design another palette again, I don't know if I'm going to include a purple in it. I like this purple, but I like the purples I can mix from the other colors better. So I'm just taking some of this bubblegum color and adding that in. If you can't watch, yeah, I will try to upload this in the next couple days to my YouTube channel, as long as it saves. So I'm grabbing some of that bubblegum, and then I actually want to tone this down a little bit. You could leave it kind of like this. This is a beautiful lavender color, but if you wanted to mute it, you can take just a teeny amount of this yellow, teeny tiny amount, and it's just going to bring that kind of color volume down just a little bit. So I'm going to go with something a little bit like this. We want to take advantage of the brush shape. So if you're using a round brush, this will be really good. Depending on whatever round brush you have, it'll be totally fine. Sorry, I'm trying to get some of my smoothie, but it's still not wanting to cooperate in the straw. So we're going to make this a long stem, and we want to have the little pearls, the pearls on the lavender buds, smaller at the top, and they're going to get a little bigger as we go down. This is kind of lavender. It's kind of, is it hyacinth or, no, this one's the hyacinth. There's another one that's similar to this. So all we're going to do is just take a little bit of that purple in our brush, and we're going to make our first little bud up there, and then we're just going to kind of tap a few times. We want them to start to get progressively larger and a little thicker as we go down. I'm just taking the tip of this brush. I'm going to refill, and in order to get bigger as I go down, I'm just going to be adding more pressure to my brush. And I'm just going to do this until I get about to here. Now I'm going to make it a little smaller. Then I'm going to grab this other purple one, and I'm just going to drop in that color kind of in a couple spots. I want to have there be some darker areas, so I am dipping straight into that purple from my palette. You could also do this with the blue, would look really nice. I'm just going to drop that in a couple spots. I don't want it everywhere. And just leave it like that. I actually like my other lavender better, but this one will look nice too. We'll bring it around. Okay. So since we have this purple here, we can do the hyacinths and they're in a similar fashion. We just want to make this a little bit more blue. So I'm going to grab a little more blue and mix that into this purple color here. I'm going to grab that blueberry muffin. This palette is on my site. You're just starting watercolor? Oh, nice. Lupin, yes, this is, I think this is kind of a lavender, kind of a lupin. Yes, thank you. So I just kind of darkened it into a more kind of blue-purple color, and we're going to add in a couple of these little hyacinths now. I'm going to put one on, I think, which side? I think I'm going to put it on this side. Sure. So these are usually shorter. These are a nice spring flower, and they're a little shorter, so I'm going to start the top and a lot less upwards, a lot shorter. I don't know why my brain cannot come up with that. Now, we're going to be kind of using a stippling type motion with our brush here. So we're just going to kind of tap, and we're doing a similar thing to this, but we're going to create more chaos. So this one, we want more chaos. You do want a little bit of white space in there, but we're just kind of tapping. And I'm going to leave it there, but I am going to take some of that blue straight in, and again, I'm just going to kind of tap that into a couple areas because I just want some variation in color there. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I think I want to add in another one. You don't have to add in another one if you don't want to, but I'm going to add in a second one because I did like kind of the balance on this one. So I'm going to do this one, and I'm going to change the height just a little bit so that it doesn't kind of all fall into the same plane, basically. Just tapping. This motion always reminds me of Bob Ross, you know, when he's making like those trees in the bushes. Even the sound it makes on the paper, I don't know if you guys can actually hear that. But I'm going to leave that there. And then I'm going to drop in some of that blue into a couple of these areas just to create some kind of shadows and just variation. Okay. Happy little trees, yes. The name of my palette is Unicorn Food. You're used to oils? Oh my goodness, oils are so much more complicated. That's what my grandma paints with, and she paints stunning. I do not have the patience. It takes her like a month to do a painting. I think I would stop painting if it took me a whole month to do a single painting. Advice on doing leaves on trees. The real key is going to be leaving white space and varying, creating where your light source is going to be. So you want highlights, and then you want it opposing things. Leave something up to the imagination is really the key there, is having some of that white space and just kind of mimicking colors and a few shapes. You just need a couple shapes that are going to really trick the eye into filling in all the other gaps. A month to a year? Oh man. I mean, I really respect the, I respect the patience. I don't personally have it. Okay, so we're gonna do some kind of Buttercup inspired ones. That's what these ones up here are. Let's just take a quick look here at these ones. We're gonna do the Buttercups, and then after we do the Buttercups, we're gonna switch back over to the other painting for a minute. We're kind of trying to do things that we want to do some layers in. These ones we don't need layers so much, but I wanted to start you on the ones that are super easy because they're nice confidence builders. All of these are actually super easy, but some of these require a little more restraint. You can kind of see the ones where they look better if there's less is more. So these are the Buttercups. So I'm actually just going to grab with my brush. I'm going to get my brush nice and wet, And then I'm just going to lightly fill up my brush with some of this yellow here. And then I'm just going to actually dip my brush back in the water. And I'm just going to make a couple little strokes kind of like this. Leave something to the imagination. Then I'm going to dip into that marmalade color, and I'm just going to kind of tap in the center. We're going to come back and add another layer on those. Let's do that one more time, because sometimes when I show these ones, I'm like, oh, that was like almost nothing to show. So I'm going to put a little bit of that yellow in. I'm going to dip my brush in the water just to dilute it a little bit, and I'm just going to make a couple little strokes, kind of like that. This one had a little bit more color to it, so I'm going to wash my brush before I add in anything else, and I'm just going to put a little water in the center there. Then I'm going to grab that marmalade and I'm just going to kind of tap just a little bit. I just want to put kind of a center point in there. Watercolor markers are cool. I get asked a lot about watercolor pencils. I don't particularly like them. I don't know if that's just because I haven't really learned how to work with them well, or if I have bad ones, but they're not my favorite. But watercolor markers are, I do really like those, especially for painting things like florals. All right, so I'm going to leave this one here for now as it is, and then we're going to switch back over to that other painting. So if you are doing both with me, now is a good time to kind of let me know in the comments, are you guys ready to switch back over, or do you need me just to like stall for a minute and answer some questions so you can catch up? Okay. Let me see. Stall. Okay, I'm stalling. So we're doing two different paintings. So my first stall will be showing you the originals again. So one that we're doing is just a really simplified kind of wildflower-esque, or I don't know, simplified painting of some flowers that I think would be super cute either on a card or framed. And then the other one that we're working on is bringing the flowers kind of in as an element, an abstracted element, into a nice little mountain wildflower scene here. I will do the red flower in a little bit, yes. You're beginner, don't think flowers are your jam. Okay, so this is really interesting. Flowers are really good to work on as a beginner, if you like flowers. If you don't like flowers, then you might not ever really like painting flowers, because you have to like something to paint it. But if you do like flowers, flowers are great as a beginner. You're going to, and save it after you have a little experience, because you're going to look back and think like, oh, I had some looseness in the flowers. And as you learn, you're going to then want to like put in all this extra detail, and you're going to kind of go for a little more realism, and things are going to start to look really controlled. And then you're going to get to a point where you're like, I want to get back to how I made flowers as a beginner, almost, with obviously with some more knowledge. But it's going to just kind of be this funny thing where you're going to be like, oh yeah, I kind of see that. So there was a question about how long is my shipping. So typically I try to pack up and get orders out if it's on a weekday, like not on the weekend. I try to get them out like the same day or the next day, just because I don't like to have orders sitting. And I specifically only put a certain number of products on my shop that I think I'm capable of filling within a day or two, so that I don't get into one of those really stressful situations, like where people get so many different orders and then they can't fill them and everybody's mad because they're waiting. So I will also say I am going to be pausing my shop for about a week or two coming up soon. We're taking some time off to do a couple fun things, and I want to make sure that nobody's waiting on orders. So if you are trying to kind of think about ordering something, this is not a pressured thing at all, but if you were thinking about it, one, either get it in the next day or two before I do pause it, or if you go and you're like, wait, she doesn't have anything, it'll be back soon. Don't worry, it will be back. But I just want to let you guys know that. So I have art stores near me, and I also do buy supplies online. I'm a bit of an art supply hoarder for sure. Okay, I think I got a couple people who said they're ready, so I am going to be transitioning back over to that other one, and I hope I'm not rushing you guys too much, but I want to make sure we get both of these things done. So when we're working with watercolor, we want to do some layering. We made our skies, we softened them so they went behind the mountains. And I do have a bit of a line here, but it's not so dark that it's going to show through the rest of them. But you don't want a real harsh stop line on anything because of the transparent nature of watercolor. Every layer that we put on top, we're going to see underneath. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to have 2 layers of mountains, and we want them to be a little bit, this back one is going to be a little lighter than this one. What we want to take advantage of is something called atmospheric perspective, which is going to help us kind of force the issue of some perspective. So things that are further away are going to be lighter in color, and you can actually see this in a couple different areas. They're a little bit more, also, this is not necessarily my favorite masterpiece, but when I was deciding what to paint, this is what I kind of painted, and I thought it would be a fun lesson because it does show a couple of these things. But notice that this one is a little bit lighter than this one, so it pushes it back a little bit. This one's a little more defined. And then even in this field, you'll see I've kind of hinted to some of the colors of the flowers, but we don't actually get much kind of quote-unquote detail until we get way into the foreground, which is going to help us kind of push those other things backwards. Yeah, I do usually put these on YouTube, and I will just tell you guys, I meant to put the last one on, and I am having an interesting experience on YouTube right now. I posted one of my videos, my shorts that I posted there like months ago, suddenly picked up and got like 2 million views or something, and it has like bombarded me with comments and all sorts of stuff, and so I've been a little overwhelmed there, so I haven't really been touching it. I finally did upload something again to YouTube yesterday, but yeah, I definitely did kind of avoid posting the live because I was like, I don't really know what to do here. So this is actually kind of inspired by Mount Rainier, so good eye. All right, so the next thing we want to do is I'm going to mix up a gray color. Oops, and I already got some purple that mixed into this well, which is fine. We can kind of start with the purple as a starting point. I'm going to put a little more water in there. Tips on reconstituting dried up tubes. Man, I have tried a couple times, like I've even cut them open and just tried to like depot them. It depends on how much effort you're willing to spend on the tubes. I will say that much. You can kind of open them up and spray them and then try to put them into pans or something like that. But it's going to take you some effort. So I had a little bit of gray already mixed up in here, and then some of this purple got in here. And it is actually a nice kind of light color. I am going to take a little bit more. So when we're making grays, we want to work in the opposite or opposing colors. So this has a little bit of purple, and the opposing color for that is actually yellow. So I'm going to put a little bit of yellow in here to make it a little bit more gray. Maybe just a little bit more. And now we've got a pretty nice gray. Oh, we also got a Moogie hair in there. Let me get that out. Moogie is my dog. And I'm just going to take this. This is a pretty nice light color, and I'm just going to go ahead and actually put this right on my outline of this first layer here. I'm going to put it kind of up towards the top where I sketched that out. And then I am going to wash my brush and I'm going to just take some water and I'm going to soften this down because we want it to kind of melt behind the other layers. Soften it down. Don't need to go all the way, but I'm just going to make sure it kind of stays nice and soft. If you want to, you could come back in with a little bit more of this. And we can kind of darken certain areas if you wanted to add in a little more texture to this. You can lift on certain areas. This part's totally optional. This is only going to add like a little bit of interest to this. But if you want to. And this was on dry, by the way. I should have mentioned that earlier. I'm going to kind of try to darken this side since the sun is on this side. So I'm going to kind of try to make this side just a little bit darker. So I can still see the pencil marks on this one because I sketched hard so that you guys could see them too. On this one, I actually did draw it out, and because I went so light, you can't see the pencil marks. I do not. I live in Colorado. Your gray looks puck brown. Oh, maybe puke brown. Oh no. So that to me tells me there's too much red, maybe undertones. So maybe add in some brighter colors like a bright green, or lean it more towards the blue side. So this is the paper I'm using. This is pretty good paper. It's not necessarily my favorite paper, but this is one of the cheaper 100% cotton ones. All right, so we are going to, I'm stalling a little bit to let you guys catch up, but we're gonna wait for this layer to dry a little bit before we go into this one. So actually, you guys tell me, do you want me to use the hair dryer and then we make our second layer of mountains, or do you guys want me to pause and switch back over to our other painting? We're about 50-50. Oh, I think we are 50-50. Maybe Switch is slightly pulling ahead. All right. I think Switch is winning, so I'm going to pause this and I'm going to set this one to the side again. The switches have it. So again, this is the kind of the inspiration for what we're doing. Again, I'm pretty much just mimicking it again. But yes, this is actually a little notebook that I made. And I don't know why I choose to use this one on live. It's actually pretty practical in real life, but trying to get this and this thing to work on live is a little bit difficult. Okay, so we're going to be doing these next, I've got a couple different flowers and my brain has just blanked on what any of them are. Cool, that's great, wonderful, love that. And I'm gonna work directly from the pan for these. So the very first one I wanna do is these like, I don't think mums, but this is what my brain is telling me is a mum, but I think it might be something else. And I'm just going to grab some of this watermelon sugar color. I'm just going to put a little in my brush, and all I'm going to be doing is using the shape of my brush to kind of create the shape. So we're going to just be laying it down and rotating just a little bit. That's going to create the shape of the flowers. Straw flower, yes, maybe that. All right, so I've got a little bit of that in there. I'm going to put one here. So I'm just going to tap. I'm going to put it at an angle. Tap, tap, tap. And just tap it. These do not need to be super perfect. We just want to create some texture. I'm going to leave that there. We can suck up a little bit of that extra water if you want to reduce the dry time. We're going to add in a couple layers on those. And let's do the same thing. I'm going to put one over here too. Tap, tap, tap. Would I ever consider doing an in-person class? So the funny thing is, actually before the pandemic, I only did in-person classes. I'm going to put a little one, I think, here too. I do sometimes think about doing in-person classes again because I did like it. I like being able to see, and I like being able to kind of walk around and make sure that people are understanding and I can see where they're at better. This one's going to be a little smaller. But one thing I don't miss about in-person classes, because my in-person classes, I would bring the supplies so that you didn't have to bring them, was I didn't like having to pack everything. Yeah, these could be zinnias. So these ones are totally open to your own interpretation. I did actually just post a tutorial yesterday on how I made this notebook. I've got a shortened version here on TikTok too, but if you want like the full details, I've got, I just posted the tutorial on how to make this notebook here. I have, so how I read the things is, one, sometimes I can see, like this is just right above me so I can see, but I also do have an iPad off to the side so that I can see the comments. Yeah. All right. So we've added those in. Now I'm going to dip into the candy apple color, which is kind of a red, and I'm going to make, let's see if I can get you guys to see this one. This one here, which is, again, my brain has forgotten every flower name in the entire world, of course. But I'm just going to put this, I think I'm going to put this right here. And I'm just going to tap. And these ones we really want to leave some space in between. We're going to kind of connect these together. You want them to get a little bigger as you go down. And I think that'll be enough. That will be a flower in itself. These kind of look like snapdragons. I could see that. I love snapdragons, probably because they remind me of my granny. She always had them in her garden and she would talk to me with them. Because, you know, if you squeeze the sides, it opens that little mouth. I do not have Facebook. I deleted Facebook both for my business and personally a while ago, and I have not regretted that decision. I was worried, but I actually kind of like it. Kind of like not having it. So I'm drinking water, and also I made myself a smoothie this morning that I left too big of ice chunks in, and so I've been trying to drink the smoothie for like 2 hours, but it's not wanting to go through my straw. Your brothers would chase you with snapdragons? That's so lovely. I mean, it's not, but it is kind of a thing. All right, so what we want to do next is I'm also going to mix up this kind of teal color here. We're going to put in the base layer of this eucalyptus. I'm having some major focus issues. I don't know why all of a sudden it wants to focus on everything. But so I've got some green that I had pre-mixed in here, and that was just a combo of these two here. What I'm going to do is just put a little water right in here, and then I have this tropical punch color, which is already kind of on its own, this like nice teal color, but it's not quite blue or green enough. So I'm just going to kind of mix that into some of those other greens that are here. I'm going to grab a little bit more. And then I'm also going to grab a little of that blueberry muffin because I want kind of this nice teal color. That's exactly what I want. You were thinking brain focus, not camera focus. I mean, my brain focus for the flower names sure is lacking today too, but... All right, so I'm going to actually start on this one by defining the stem. You'll notice I haven't put the stems in, but this is kind of that eucalyptus inspired thing. And I'm just going to kind of make a stroke down because I want to define where I want this to go. And it does not need to be straight. It can kind of be curved. It can kind of be a little lumpy. We're going to hide a bunch of that anyways. And then all I'm going to do is, we've been doing a lot of this, but we're just going to kind of tap. And so I'm holding it kind of at an angle, and I'm just going to kind of tap. So I'm going to start at the top with a tap. And they usually have like opposing ones. So I'm just going to kind of tap a few times. And again, this is one where you want to kind of change the direction. On some of them, you're only going to really see the one because maybe that one's facing. You want to have a little bit of some space in between, and you want them to get a little bigger as you go down. This one is a good one to practice not overthinking it and leave something to the imagination. Okay. So you can let these ones dry completely before adding a second layer. Mine are still a little damp, and so if I wanted to add in, like maybe let's say I'm going to add in some of this bright pink bubble gum into this purple that I already have here, and if I wanted to do a light wash of some of those and kind of add those in, it will blend in a little bit more. You can kind of choose if you want it to blend or if you want to keep them more separate, then I would wait a bit. We can add on some more of that in a minute too. Okay, it's about time to switch back over, so let me know if you need me to stall or if you're ready to get going on that other one again. I think it's going to take me 3 hours to drink that smoothie. Ready. All right, everybody's ready. I'm going to move this over. We do want this one to be dry before we add on this second layer again. So if yours is not dry, I think mine is dry enough to actually go. If yours isn't dry, this is where you're going to want a hairdryer or one of those heat guns or something. And I already have some of this gray here, but I want to darken it a little bit because remember we were talking about that atmospheric perspective. And I'm also going to change the color a little bit. So my favorite way to make gray with my palette is taking a little bit of that blue raspberry, which is kind of that phthalo blue color, and then mixing it with a little bit of that marmalade, which is going to make us a nice gray. Just real quick. And I'm going to mix that in. I just want this to be a little bit darker, a little bit different for this front layer of those mountains. So that will be just a little darker than that. Throw it back in the blender. Yeah, it's like, I don't know what it is. The ice itself didn't blend, but it's too bad too, because I actually got passion fruit chunks from Sprouts last night, and so it's a really good smoothie. Hi, Monica, by the way. All right, so I'm going to just kind of sketch in this one, and I'm just going to start similar to how I did before, where I'm just going to kind of lay that right at the top edge of where I had that sketched out. Wash my brush, and I'm just going to kind of blend it downwards so it's going to soften. And again, if we want to, we can try to darken over on this side a little bit. You don't have to. You can lift out a little bit if you want to. You get to kind of play with this a little bit if you want to. I'm going to bring this down just a little bit more. And then re-soften again. That's a very, very nice compliment. I feel like I have a long way to go to be the Bob Ross of watercolor for sure. But hey, I will let that make my day for right now. Okay, so again, we get another choice. Do you want me to use the hairdryer and start on the meadow, or do you want me to switch back over to the other painting? Watercolor, I find, I originally started painting with acrylic, and that's still one that I paint with a lot. But watercolor, I was really intimidated by it, but it's one of the more methodical painting things. So it's actually a pretty good one to start with because there's a lot of instructions and kind of theory-based things you can do. Whereas with acrylic, there is kind of like, I feel like you need either more innate curiosity or talent to really like dive into acrylic. Whereas if you're like, oh, I just don't know, I don't have a ton of confidence, watercolor is actually one that I think is a little easier to get into to start with. Switch. All right, we're switching back. You're stuck on acrylic and glass. Oh, I love acrylic on glass. I think it's so beautiful. All right. Here is the state of this painting so far. So I'm going to take a second and we're going to actually add in, we're going to do a little bit of layering, and then we're going to add in some of the stems too. So I'm going to start with the buttercups. I want to layer just a little more on those. So I'm going to take a slightly higher concentration of this yellow color, and I'm just going to kind of define in certain areas where some of those petals are. I'm going to leave that for a second, and I'm going to be softening those in a bit, but I kind of want it to soak into the page just a bit. So now I'm going to come back in after I made those strokes, and I'm going to soften just along them. I wanted it to soak in just a little bit, and it did. Soften again with some water in the brush. And you can see kind of, it's not a huge change, but it's enough of a change to kind of bump some of those petals a little bit in front with a little more detail. And you can come back in if you soften too much and add in a little bit more of that. And we also have the option, if you want to make your centers a little bit more kind of orange, we can kind of come in here and just tap a bit. Leave something to the imagination. It's okay if things blend. You can always grab a little bit of that. So yeah, you can't really do watercolor on a normal canvas. Yes, you can put it on there, but it's not going to move the same. It doesn't stick to it as well. But you can put, there are some like grounds and things that you can put on a normal canvas to make it accept watercolor a little better. Okay, all right, so next we're gonna do some of these stems. I'm gonna put, these are the, I think the hyacinths, I'm gonna do those and this one here straight from, I actually need to re-wet my colors because they're getting a little dry. But I'm gonna go straight from this key lime pie color. It's just like a lemon yellow or a yellow green color because I want those ones to be really bright. And on the little hyacinths, it's going to be super duper simple. All we're going to do is just one line down and then just kind of hint to some of those little leaves that kind of pop up. There, they're done. Oh no, your sleeve smeared the stems. Clothing penalty. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one, the same color, not the same thing. And on this one, we actually want to create a little story in here about how all of these things connect to the center stem. So we're going to kind of put that stem that's going to go down, and then we want to connect them. And then if you wanted to add in some kind of leaves, you can kind of, if you want some slightly different shapes of leaves, I'm just going to kind of fluff my brush along here to create some thicker leaves. And if you wanted to, if you're like, I don't like that bright, bright color, you can always, while things are wet, you can come in and bring in a little darker green into some of the areas. And sometimes that can really help things. And I'm going to also add in my Buttercup Greenery. So I'm just going to take, I've got some of this, whatever, this is just an amalgamation of a bunch of different greens. Since I've got it in my palette, I'm just going to use that. If you were trying to make this green, I would mix these two and then some of those blues in. And I'm just going to bring these down here. And I don't actually know what kind of leaves they have, but these cute little ones, I'm just kind of trying to vary the types of leaves that are shown here. Just adding those in. Just some cute little leaves. And we can add in another layer of color there if we want, or we can bring in the stems here. I think I'm going to add in another layer of color to these ones that we're not sure if they're paper straws or zinnias or something, but I'm just going to take a little bit of this red and mix it in with a little bit of that watermelon sugar, and I'm just going to kind of tap. I just want to add in some extra texture. You don't have to. You'll kind of know when you feel like you are complete. Mine felt like they needed just a little more dimension. It does kind of scream Mother's Day. And then I'm going to take some of this, I'm going to add in a little bit more of my lighter green, and I'm actually going to make the little bulb underneath, and I'm going to do this while it's wet just so that in case it can kind of bleed together, it does. Because I sometimes like how that looks. I'm just going to add that little bulb underneath. And then I'm just going to add in the stems. I didn't add leaves on this one on the previous one, and I think I'm going to not on this one. But you could add in some leaves. And while these are still wet, I'm also going to take a little bit of some darker blue. And I'm just going to tap kind of at the bottom to give it a little more shading, shadowing there. And then we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to mix this up. I'm going to get a little bit brighter here. And in the lavender, so first we have our stem down here, but this is lavender lupine, we're not sure. I'm also going to kind of hint to it in some of the areas in here where you'd be able to see it. And I'm going to leave it not showing in other areas where I wouldn't be able to see it. And then in order to actually create the full illusion of the eucalyptus, we do need to kind of darken the undersides. So I'm going to take, again, I'm going to mess with this color again. I'm going to add in some of that tropical punch color. I'm going to add in some of that blueberry muffin or darker blue color until I get a slightly darker version of this. Need a little more of that blue. A little more of that tropical punch. And there we go. And I'm just going to put these at the base of some of them. I'm just going to kind of tap just on a couple. Right at the bottom of them. And then before they settle too much, I'm going to wash my brush and I'm just going to kind of soften just a little bit. Just a little bit. That'll give us a little more dimension on those. Yes, you're right. The lavender has kind of, it's a little more structured. And that pretty much completes this one. You could add in some other darkness and some other layers. So, but this is pretty much where this one's going to end. Yeah, this one I think would be really cute. You're absolutely right, on a greeting card kind of at the bottom, and then you could put the words up here. Okay, let's get back to our other one, which is a little more complicated. And it is time to go in. And we're going to be working, we want this to be dry. Mine is not quite dry yet, so I am going to use the hairdryer now. So if you are noise adverse, I'm going to turn it on in just a second. So you might want to mute it for just a little bit. It usually only takes me about 30 seconds to actually dry this. So it's going to come on now in 3, 2, and 1. All right, got that nice and dried. Now I'm going to be messing with this green color, and I want this to actually at first be a much lighter color, so I'm going to place more water in there to get it more kind of opaque, and I think I can use this as a base. I might have to tap this out because it might be a little too blue based. But I think I can kind of get it closer to more of a yellowish green. So I'm just going to grab a little bit of that kind of yellow ochre-esque color, place that in here. And I want this to be fairly nice and light. That'll be pretty good. Ooh, that really reminds me of like a John Deere green kind of, but yes, I do try to remember to give you guys heads up when I move the camera or something like that too, or the noises. So all I'm going to do is just take a little bit of this, and I'm just going to place this kind of along the top of where our meadow is. Wash my brush. I'm going to soften in the center. Soften it down because we want this to be, we want these to have to be little highlight points, but we do want there to be more kind of softness down in this middle ground here. And I'm just going to actually wet pretty much the whole bottom part of this page. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't have to completely get it wet or anything. And then I'm going to tap in some of this green in a couple areas. Maybe a little more over here. And then I'm going to start to lay in those initial kind of feelings of some of the flowers. So while everything is wet, I'm going to take a little bit of that yellow, and I'm just going to kind of tap that in. And because I'm putting this in when it's wet, this is going to kind of naturally soften it, but I'm just going to kind of put in a couple little areas where it feels like maybe they're blooming. And I'm going to put in larger taps, the closer it gets, because we want to kind of feel like the flowers are getting a little bigger. This is kind of a put them where you kind of feel like it kind of a thing. As they get closer here, they're going to get even bigger, where you're going to actually start to see some of the individual flowers. So I'm just going to place in a couple of those. I'm going to wash my brush, and now I'm going to go over to, let's put in some kind of orange one. So I'm going to put a little bit of this orange in my brush, and I'm going to do the same thing in just a couple little areas. You can add in whatever colors you want here. And I'm going to put in a couple bigger ones here. Some of these you can see I put where it was really wet, some where it's not. It's okay. We want this to be pretty free-flowing and kind of nice and loose, so it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to go in with the watermelon sugar, kind of a pink type color. And let's put in some of those here too. Maybe I put in a little too many there. Whoops. Well, let's lean into it. I made a mistake. Let's make it worse. Ready, set, go. Put in a couple more of the pink. And then I'm going to really kind of lean in heavily to the pink on some of this right here. I mean, even if you left it kind of like this, even this in itself, you kind of get the feeling of it. We are going to mess with it a little bit more, but if you're somebody who likes to mess with stuff too much, one thing you can kind of challenge yourself with is if you get to a point where you really like it, consider stepping away from it and calling it done at that point. If you're like, I really like this, but I kind of feel like the more I mess with it, the more I'm going to mess things up. Consider calling it done and stepping away for at least a while, and then you can come back and you can make some adjustments. So, anyways, I'm going to leave the flowers like that for right now, and if we want to add in those nice trees on the side, you don't have to do this part, but while it's still wet, I like to kind of add them in now because it'll soften kind of into the tops of those hills. And I want to make a darker green, so I'm going to grab some of this guacamole color. I'm going to grab some of that blue raspberry color to make a darker green. Maybe some of that blueberry muffin. And there, that'll be a really nice green. And for these little trees, you don't have to add these in, but if you want to, I usually just kind of make a little line and then just tap. Oop, I had a little bit too much on my brush, so I just tapped it off. And we're just going to kind of wiggle down and see, because that's still nice and wet, that's going to not be kind of a nice dispersal, and it'll just kind of melt into the hillside, which is exactly what I want. Maybe one more little baby tree. You could add in even more if you wanted to. Happy little trees. Yes, absolutely. All right, you guys can vote. Should I leave this so that there are just the trees? So here's one thing. This is a question compositionally, but there's something that I kind of think about sometimes when I am doing something like this, and that is, where is the attention going? So one of the focal points is here because of the sunset. So by putting another element over here, you'll see it already kind of looks a little more balanced because your eye kind of goes in this direction. It could look nice to kind of frame it a little bit more by putting in more of those trees. But these are some of those questions you can kind of start to ask yourself. Even if you have a plan, sometimes, depending on how certain things work, you might want to differ from your initial plan if it's actually going to help the painting look a little more balanced. Now, this is a pretty kind of center-focused balance painting. All the interest is kind of in the middle or the main points, except for this. But yeah, you guys let me know. Should I only do trees on one side or should I put them on the other two? Frame it. All right, I think framing it is winning. Barely. Barely, barely. Okay, I think framing it won just by a little bit. Okay, so let's add in a couple over here, or maybe even just one. Maybe we'll split the difference. Either way, I mean, even if this doesn't look great, it'll be a great way for us to kind of see. And since we just kind of talked about that, now I waited for a little bit too much. So I need to re-wet that area in order to actually get it to kind of bleed. Well, I kind of like it with the one. I'm going to leave one there for now. We might come back and add some more. Okay, things are still kind of wet. They're kind of dry. What I want to do now is we want to keep some of this lightness in the middle here, but we want to add in some depth of possible, some kind of like divots and things like that in the landscape. So we want to bring in some lighter colors, but of some greens, and then we're going to make it, if we're looking at this, I should have had this here. Notice how it gets darker and darker the closer it is. So let's add in some direction with some light strokes and of darker greens. And then let's make it a little darker as it gets closer. Okay. So I'm going to take a little bit of this green that we mixed here. I'm going to add a little more blue to it just because I want it to be a slightly different kind of color. And I've got some of that in my brush, then I added a little more water to my brush. And I'm going to kind of emphasize on the bottoms here. And I have talked quite a bit, so some of mine is dry. But I'm going to kind of start to add in some of these directions. And then I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to kind of just soften along. I want these to feel kind of soft. But I do want kind of some variation in how saturated some of those colors are. And there, I actually feel like I've got some pretty good direction going on those. We can mess with those a little bit more. And then as we get closer here, I'm going to start to add in some of the darker green. Really kind of lay that in here. And we don't need this to be absolutely perfect. I'm just going to kind of place this in a couple areas. I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to soften that in. And this is another point where you might look at this and think, I feel like if I keep messing with this, I'm going to mess it up. This might be another good point to pause this one and call it done or call it quote unquote done, depending on if you come back to mess with it some more. Because even here, we kind of already still have some of those impressions of what we were trying to do. I am going to continue to mess with mine a little bit more. And I'm going to do that by adding in some even darker green values. So I'm going to mix in, I want some more kind of blues in this green. So I'm going to mix in some more blues. Make a slightly darker color. I'm going to kind of start to hint to maybe, and it's going to soften because this is still all wet, but I'm going to kind of start to hint to some of the stems and things that might be going on, just give some direction. Even just kind of tap in and make certain areas a little darker. Because what we're trying to do is just build up more color here. Yeah, the mountains could have a bit more definition for sure. Let's play with those for just a second while we let that soak in a little bit more, because we're going to need to potentially add some more there. So I still have some of this gray here, and I think I'm going to leave this one be, but let's just mess with kind of adding in a little extra color on some of these. I'm just going to place it in a couple areas. And then again, I'm going to do that softening thing because I just kind of want it to match the feel of the rest of this painting. Maybe we actually put some darker colors kind of here. And it's kind of an interesting point to look at, like maybe sometimes you just need to add in a little more definition. And you might also have a different answer to this. Like you might think that you don't like what just happened there, and maybe you liked it a little more simple. That's totally fine too. But I do like to kind of show you guys some different options. So there's a little bit more definition on the mountains. You may like that, you may not. That means it's soaked in a little bit more here. So I'm gonna darken this green a little bit more. I need more saturation of this color in general, so I'm gonna grab a little more green plus a little more of that blue. Let's just give it a little check. And let's go back in and kind of add in, you know, more of those kind of stem impressions. They don't need to be perfect. Darken in a couple areas. Paper can affect a lot of different things, yes. I'm just going to soften a couple areas. And let me check time. So we're getting real close. So what I'm going to do next is I am going to, you could leave it here. I actually think it looks quite nice like this. But I want to show you one other option if you want to add even more detail, which is going to require me to dry this layer off. So I'm going to be using the hairdryer again in just a second. So again, if you are sensitive to this noise, it'll take me about 20 or 30 seconds to dry this a bit more. So it's going to be happening now. You might want to mute in 3, 2, 1. All right. Yes, you should be able to watch this later. I will be uploading some stuff. Now, there's a couple questions I want to talk about while I'm doing this. All I'm going to do is come back in. This is now drier, and I'm just going to kind of actually add some definition. You don't have to, but you can add some definition to some of these things. Maybe if you wanted to kind of create the illusion of some petals. You don't need to, but sometimes it can help. Having more definition in the foreground will bring it a little bit forward. So I'm just going to kind of define some of these things that are going on here. And there's a couple questions. So one question is, what's the best paper for a beginner? And the real answer that I have is whatever paper you're going to paint on. A lot of people will say only work on cotton, blah, 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 blah. And while cotton is better, it doesn't have some effects that cellulose paper can provide. The main thing, though, is as a beginner, buying 100% cotton paper can be a real... I'm going to add in a little bit of darkness, too, just to add in some shadows. I don't know if this is going to help or not. But it can be a huge investment. And if you're a beginner and you buy yourself your paints are $20 and then you buy yourself a $40 pad of paper, you might not ever paint anything on it because you might think it's too precious. So it's really going to kind of depend on what your budget is, what you like. But yeah, my real answer is whatever you're going to paint on. If you're too afraid to paint on nice paper, then just paint on cheaper paper. The best thing you can do as a beginner is paint. So if any of that is going to stand in your way, like I started on Canson XL 140 pound because it's a fairly price efficient paper, and I wasn't afraid to make mistakes on it, and you need to be able to make mistakes as a beginner. The one thing though is you want at least 140 pound paper because you do get into some real sticky situations with much thinner paper. And usually if you can get 140 pound paper, there will probably be an option to get it in cold press, which is going to have a little more texture. And I do think that the texture helps. I think it's more forgiving. I'm going to add in some more of those stems now that let's add in some leaf things. We don't need to add every single one doesn't need to have it, but just kind of adding in leave a few things up to the imagination. Oh yeah, I actually really like the flowers on this one a lot better than my previous one. I'm going to leave that there. Let's take a look at what we created today. This is the creation today, and I'm going to take a second to, you guys can ask some questions as well, but I'm going to take a second to actually kind of critique and compare and things like that, because sometimes this is really interesting to do. I painted this last night. I'll be honest, I had planned on doing something completely different for this week, but it was going to take more preparation from you guys, and I didn't communicate it fast enough, so I had to come up with something last night, and this is what I came up with. Since it was my first time painting it, I had some interesting experiences. Now, I will say, from last night, one, I had better balance in the general sketch composition, where these are a little bit thinner, they're less of the focal point. I actually like that part better. I think the mountains have better texture. I got better color on my trees, and I think some of this meadow is a bit better. But when I look at this one, I like my sky better. I do like the balance that we created here, where there's just kind of this one lopsided portion here and this. And I think my flowers are way better than my one from last night. So even in a second attempt, you can learn a whole bunch of different things from it. Now let's take a look at the other one we created. So this was our other composition, and I think I like my one from last night a little bit better because I kind of let them be a little bit more, not everything is completely straight up and down. But other than that, I actually like the Buttercups on this one a lot better. yeah, so here's what we created today. Let me look through and see if you've got any questions that I can answer real quick before I go and make myself some lunch or finish my smoothie. I don't know. You should definitely grab your watercolors. You never know what to paint. How do you decide? Ooh, that is really hard to answer. A lot of times I'm just really struck by something. I take a lot of pictures of the mountains and things like that. And even if I don't paint them directly, I might be inspired by different elements. It's going to depend on what you like. You know, do you like flowers? Do you like animals? Do you like abstract stuff? If you're brand new to painting though, and you're like, I don't know what to paint, if that's going to be the thing that's going to stop you from painting is figuring it out, just grab some tutorials. Do something that somebody else is teaching you, because then you don't have to decide what to paint. And you can actually, you know, one of the things that I recommend doing is taking something from this lesson and maybe thinking like, okay, I really liked what we did here, but what if I put these elements in a different type of painting? Or what if instead of these being straight across, what if I put them in a circle and they all kind of met at the center point, or they poked out from the circle itself? It needs a B. Oh, I could see that. The pink flower. Pink flower to the back center left. The mountains is this. No, this is on a watercolor block. How do you make it more abstract? You're going to want to be looser with your strokes. You're going to want to leave a little more up to the imagination, not fill in as many things. That is a really, really hard thing to do. Next class, so I'm doing these every other week. So next week will be a week where you're off. I'll have plenty of other tutorials and stuff. I've got a ton on my YouTube and on TikTok. So if you're still wanting to do some watercolor. But after that, yeah, that'll be 11 a.m. Mountain Time. You can absolutely paint really realistic things with watercolor. It will take a lot of patience and a lot of layering. Your paintings never come out the way you imagine. How do you do that? One of the things that I think is really important with watercolor, especially when you're getting started, is being more forgiving with yourself and also adapting. So when you are painting something, if something isn't quite giving what you wanted it to, consider taking a look at what is happening and what is good and start to build the composition. Be a little more kind of adaptive to what is happening. Like with acrylic paintings, if I do know exactly what I'm going to paint, and then I paint exactly that. But with watercolor paintings, I definitely adapt a bit more and kind of see what's happening within the composition, within the water, within the way things are moving. And I kind of try to like have like a general goal in mind. Tips on giving up control when switching from acrylic to watercolor. A few things. 1, don't hold your brushes tight. 2, use one brush. Because like with acrylic, well, this depends on how you paint. With acrylic, I paint with a ton of different brushes. And this is going to make you kind of adapt, and you're going to have to be a little bit more loose with things because you only have one tool. Now, this is a very versatile tool and you can do pretty much anything with it, but it does make you be a little bit more abstracted in some ways. And the other thing is embrace the white space. So don't be afraid of it. That's going to help you. I mean, even if you look here, there's some white space here. And while it doesn't look all that polished, it does kind of help that pop out a little bit more. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I will see you guys in about 2. Oh, one other little reminder again, if this is you do not need to purchase anything from me. You can follow along with any supplies that you have. But if you are considering purchasing, I am going to be temporarily closing my shop for about a week or a week and a half. Coming up pretty soon, I got to make some changes, and also I'm taking a little bit of time off coming up. So if you were hoping to order something either like now through Monday-ish, I'm not exactly sure when I'm going to close it down, would be a good time to do it. Or you can wait, and if you go and you're like, oh no, I can't see anything, it'll be back. Don't worry, it'll be back. So I hope everybody has a really, really good day. And if you want to show me what you painted, I love seeing the videos when you tag me on here. And I hope that everybody has a really good day, and I will see you guys soon.